Okay, we're here on the podcast with Jesse Cook. Nice to have you on here. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, you're one of these guys. I've done a couple corporate gigs years ago where you were playing. I was doing something I think with Jim Witter with the Piano Man show, or Jim
Okay.
somehow, but never really crossed paths. But it certainly, I can't really go to a theater almost anywhere, especially across Canada, without seeing that you're on the schedule at some point.
I tour a lot, or I toured a lot. Lately, this year has been the first year in the last 25 years where I wasn't on the road most of the time. You know, we were doing upwards of 100 shows a year for I don't know how long, forever. I mean, it started in 95. I got my first record deal in 95 and started touring. And it just each year it seems to get more and more, you know, as we tour further and further afield. You know, at first it was mostly Canada, a little bit of the US. Now it's mostly the US and a little bit of Canada. And then we're, you know, touring in Asia and Europe and everything. And then, of course, a year ago, February, it all kind of came crashing to a halt.
Was that your last show in February of last year?
Yeah, we're in Europe, and I remember we're sitting in a hotel lobby going, wow, you know, we're reading the news going, gee, I wonder if this is going to affect our Canadian tour. And I remember my manager at the time sort of said, no, not to worry. 2 weeks later, the tour was canceled, and you know, the rest is history. But I have to say, you know, one door closes and another door opens. And in my case, it's kind of, it's given me a year I never would have had. Like my kids are still kids, you know, they're teenagers at this point, but you know, I've only got a few more years before they grow up and leave. And I realized at the rate I was going with the touring and everything, I wasn't going to get to spend that much time. It was more like holidays and things, whereas this has been a solid year of, you know, really just the family together. And I love it. I do. I feel bad saying that COVID, you know, is in any way good, but if there's a silver lining for me, it was that I got to spend a year with my family, and it's been great.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I've pretty much almost everyone I've asked or been on the podcast basically had the same reaction as you did, where they've enjoyed this time. It's been something they didn't expect and were able to do things they haven't done before, spend time with family and you know, make sure the lawn looks good and all those things that, you know, you don't have a chance to do as much. And it's very rare that I've heard anyone unhappy about it. Mind you,
I think it doesn't touch you. I mean, you know, if there's somebody in my family got sick or you know, God forbid, died of it, it would be a very different experience. And there are people dying of it, so that's why I feel bad even saying it. You know, because I realize it does touch some people. But I feel lucky we somehow it didn't really come into our lives. And you know, the person I was mostly worried about was my mother, who's 85, and you know, she got her first shot about a week ago. So, you know, I think we may be through the worst of it. So sorry, I cut you off there. What were you going to say?
No, I agree. And my mom too, same thing. She's 80 and just got her first shot. And that's the thing, right? You worry about those people, but then you start seeing there's a lot of people our age that are having complications with it. It's just still something you just don't want to get at any age. And but yeah, the music industry, it's been interesting. I think it's been worse, obviously, for your gigging musicians and your technicians and those people in that field who rely on those gigs to happen. And a lot of those people have gotten other jobs. It's going to be interesting when things start rolling again, how easy of a transition it's going to be. I think for some it's going to be fine, but some others it's going to be a difficult upswing and up transition, especially for the really big shows when you're going out with 60 people or something and half your crew, you know, I've got regular gigs with a regular paycheck with a pension and health care and all that stuff, and they say, oh, this actually looks pretty good.
Well, that's exactly what happened to us. I think our sound man, you know, at first was kind of, what am I going to do? And he was living on those CRB checks. And And then, he just didn't want to take money from the government. He got a job, still in the music industry, but in a part that's not touring and doing shows. And, I think at first he thought it was just going to be something that he just did until we go back on the road again. But he actually found he liked it. So now last time I talked to him, I said, are you going to want to go back on the road when this is all over? And he's like, you know what? I'm sitting on the fence. I'm not sure. And I get it, right? I mean, I think for people who are road dogs, it's hard because we love it. We love to go out and tour and do shows and be part of that big experience. But there's always this bittersweet thing where you have to leave your loved ones behind to go and do that. You kind of go out with a bunch of guys that, become your family on the road, but your real family, you don't see. And it's hard. It's a hard choice to make. And I think everybody I know who tours for a living kind of has to wrestle with that a little bit. And for some of us, maybe this whole experience will have changed the, where you sit on that issue and how much you really want to go out and tour. It's kind of given everybody a sense of, another alternative lifestyle you could possibly live, right?
Yeah. And I think we all think that we don't want to be off the road to some extent. And we've never had an extended period for that long. It's almost like you're weaning yourself off it. At first, it's like, I can't wait to get back out. And then you hit this certain, whatever it is, the 8th month or 9th month or 10th month phase where you get through that hump. And then you start getting comfortable. It's like, this is not too bad. And it's like thinking about going to the airport and checking in and, doing all those things that we think we like doing. It doesn't sound so attractive anymore.
No, for sure. I think in the end, we'll see. I mean, maybe by another year of this, everybody will be, forget it. I want to get out and, I'm sick of living in the same city all the time. For musicians, we have this, it's something we forget too. Sometimes I'll be talking to people and, cities will come up and, you've been to most of them, or, whether they're talking about San Diego or Berlin or whatever, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that little restaurant. And you realize, most people don't travel for a living. Most people see the same city and then just go away on vacations, which is totally normal. We're the abnormal ones, who kind of have this crazy lifestyle. And maybe another year of this, and I'll be ready to get back out and see the world again. But for now, I'm loving it.
Yeah, I think the thing is, once we start and all your friends and people are out touring, that's when it's gonna really hit. It's gonna be like, oh darn, I really want to be back out there again. But I think we'll come around. We're a little ways away yet to really go full tilt, but we're getting there. It's getting closer. So Jesse Cook is this great phenomenon, super talented. I have a lot of friends over the years who just love going to your concerts and big fans, and you really have this wide range of fans and people that come to see you. What's the secret sauce behind that, do you think? What really draws people to come see Jesse Cook in your eyes?
Yeah, you know what? I don't really know. I feel in some ways I was really lucky that the kind of music that I loved right from the start when I was a little kid just happened to kind of become in vogue right as I was sort of, in my early 20s and kind of beginning to really discover my, all my sort of various interests in music were coming together, my arranging and my producing and my engineering and the guitar playing, it all sort of coalesced into this thing just as flamenco music was sort of finding a world stage because of bands like the Gypsy Kings. And I, my own personal history, my dad had just happened to retire to Arles in the south of France, where the Gypsy Kings, or part of the Gypsy Kings, are from, and his neighbor just happened to be Nicolas Reyes of the Gypsy Kings, and it was like this sort of weird conspiracy to sort of get me into this music that, the world was just interested in at a point where my career was ready to do that, and so I feel very lucky. But having said that, the world's interest in that kind of music sort of peaked, I'd say, 2 or 3 years into my career. And then the rest of it, that sort of 25 years since then, has been really about, just building an audience and building a show and a rapport with that audience so that they know when you come back, it's going to be a great Roomba party and everybody's going to have fun and end up dancing their butts off and go crazy until the next time we come back. And that's sort of been what I've been doing for 25 years, is just trying to, sort of develop that relationship. And the other thing, I mean, it was a massive seismic shift, as you probably experienced this too, is, I got sort of well known initially through the kind of the old system, the record industry. I got a record deal, and the record company sort of got me out there and publicized what I was doing, and that was the world, right? The music industry at that time was all music stores and in-store performances and posters and whatever else, and festivals and things. Whereas now, I sort of feel like the industry that decides whether or not you become sort of well known or not is probably math. It's an algorithm on YouTube, and so now the latest iteration of how I'm trying to sort of find my audience and continue to connect with my audience has been YouTube. I've been actually making a music video every week by myself.
That's awesome.
I'm social isolation in lockdown.
Yeah,
I realized that it was going to be another year of this, and I sort of thought, well, I need a mountain to climb. I can't just sit here and look out the window. So I every week it's crazy. I'm like that guy. I don't know. Did you ever see the TV show Lost?
Oh yeah.
In the second season, they find some guy down in a bunker with a computer.
Yeah.
And there's a countdown clock with 24 hours.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't punch in the code, they don't know what's going to happen. They think the island might blow up. So he punches in the code and the clock resets, and then he's got to wait there for another 24 hours and punch in the code. That's me every week. I upload that video on Friday at noon, and then the clock resets, and I've got another week to think of a song, record the song, play all the parts, arrange it, mix it, master it, start shooting video, edit the video, color grade the video, upload it to all these different formats, and then get it by Friday, reset, start again. And it's this crazy thing that has been really fun and really difficult, which is kind of exciting too, because it's nice to have a new challenge at 56, and that's what I've been doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's hard to do, and it's way more time consuming than people think. Even for my podcast, it's by the time you say getting it ready, getting the video ready, doing the edits, and just uploading it to all these formats and doing all that takes forever.
And it surprises me. But the nice thing about it is with the pressure, the pressure of like, once you decide you're going to do something and it's going to be every week, it takes all of the kind of navel gazing out of the whole process. You know what I mean? That I don't have time to sit around and think about, should I or shouldn't I? You know what I mean? I start recording a song and I know I'm going to try and print it before I go down for dinner. You know what I mean? Whereas when I'm making a record, I'll take 2 years to make a record, and I'll be like, I don't know. Let me listen. Let me try with this bass, and let me try that part. Maybe we could switch out the verse. Well, you know what I mean? You can just sit there and, give yourself option anxiety. Whereas when you want this thing done, it's just go. There's no moment where you can hesitate. If you hesitate, you're going to miss your deadline. And it's kind of fun. Like, I guess I don't know. I imagine this is what it's like to do one of those shows like, Saturday Night Live or something, where every week they have to write a whole show and then it goes live. I sort of feel like, it's not at that level, but I don't have other people to bounce ideas off. It's all, just sort of me here in the studio doing it. So it's it's been pretty fun, I have to say.
That's cool. So let's talk how your process for doing that every week. So are you writing any new songs, or are you just trying to find songs, or it's a combination of different things?
It's mostly because because of the deadline. It started off as just, I'll do new versions of old songs. I'll reinterpret. I'll try things where I'm playing all the instruments. There's nobody else in it, or different arrangements, because, at first I didn't have all my instruments, so there was no bass. So I ended up playing surdo and udu and all these drums that have a big bottom end or djembe, anything that could kind of cover that area. But then once I started doing it more and more regularly, I started, getting my drums out of storage and setting them up and sort of having things ready to go. But and then there's a few new songs as well. That is part of it. It's more of a challenge to start writing a new song and know you've got to finish it. So usually it's one of those things where I go into it and I think, well, we'll just see. It's just something new. Whether it'll become a song on an album, we'll see. But I'll just kind of go along and see if I need to pull the ripcord at some point in the week and jump to a song that that's already finished. And also I've recorded a few extra songs and just mixed them and put them in the can just in case, for emergency use only, break glass and all that business. So, but in the meantime, it's been a real challenge. It's been really fun.
So recording on Pro Tools?
No, you know what? It's funny. I've always been a Logic Pro guy. Yep. I actually started with Logic back in 92, 93 when it was eMagic. It was just a sequencer. There was no audio. Now, is your audience, are they mostly musicians? Because they're going to be like bored out of their mind with this conversation. I don't want to
go for it.
Anyway, I started with Logic back when it was just a sequencer, and then little by little, it's become kind of an amazing thing. And then it got bought by Apple, and I have mixed feelings about it, but it still is a kind of an amazing tool. And I mean, you were saying this at the beginning that you started with a studio, and then the technology's changed over the years. My company is called Coach House Music because originally my studio was in the Coach House behind my house when I used to live a few blocks from here.
Nice.
And it was just, a coach house full of technology. And then little by little, it all got replaced with my laptop and everything became, now I've got a couple of little outboard gear things that, I like to tweak with or whatever. But it's really just, it's all in the computer. And in my basement, there's a room that's sort of like the museum of ancient technology that is no longer required, old samplers and synthesizers and things. It's like, why? Why would you bother trying to plug in an old MIDI system with wires and everything? It's all so much simpler now. Yep. And it's, the other thing too that I love is, there was a period where I was really leaning heavily on the synths, and I still love synths to some degree, but more and more I'm trying to get back to, just playing everything live and kind of having that organic feel, because I've gotten to the point where quantized audio is starting to drive me a little bit batty. Do you know what I mean? That when you listen to the radio, after a while, you're like, why do I feel trapped in this music? And you're like, well, there's no breathability, right? Everything is quantized and auto-tuned, and to the point where it just, it all sounds huge and really sort of perfect, but it also starts to drive you a little bit around the bend. Like, you listen to some old Led Zeppelin groove where they didn't even have a click track or something, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. What happened?
Yeah, it speeds. I actually just had a podcast a little while ago with Fred Penner, and we were talking about this, where he was saying live, he has a tendency to speed, and his band members always are after him, but I said, but that's lots of times just organic, right? It's you get to a course, and back in the day, you pick an old song, an old album from any kind. There are tempo fluctuations all over the place. Yeah. And I said to him, what's the last time you've left a concert and you're walking out and you hear the person next to you kind of go, yeah, that's great, but he really speeds up in the courses. I mean, people don't notice those unless it's really, insane. Yeah. But there's something to that, right?
I've had certain band members who sped up to the point where, we would start the song and be a rumba. By the time we finished, it would be a merengue. And I just, you can't play certain things. They don't sound, phrases don't work at that tempo. That drives me a bit batty. But otherwise, I agree with you. I think there is a certain kind of tug and pull. And, if your band is really sort of great in that pocket, then you don't feel it. Like we, often we'll do live recordings of, certain songs, and, I'll bring cameras on the road and actually just shoot a live version of a song. Yeah. There's always something about the live version that kills the studio version, because it's got this bigness and this energy, and it's kind of untamed. There's no click anywhere in that, and something happens. I don't know what it is, but.
Yeah, you want to be able to control the speed yourself, but you don't want the drummer taking off on his own.
Yeah. I think, honestly, that's what it is. If you have a good drummer, you're fine. You're in good hands. That's the whole thing. Good drummer, good band. That's the way that works.
Then you get those all the time, those drummers who'll who are just complete sticklers on time.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're like, no, you're not moving.
Yeah.
You're staying right here. And it's
Oh,
like, oh, yeah, but I want to go a little bit. And it's like, no.
I don't like the drummers when they have the little sort of click in their ear.
Yeah.
And they're going to hold you to it. It's like, no. If it's not feeling right, but I mean, there's something to be said for it. Like there's been a few times where we did big outdoor shows like in Montreal. We played for 100,000 people or something. And when you're used to doing a theater that's got whatever it is, 1,500, 2,000 people or something, and then suddenly you're in front of 100,000 people. It's just like this sea of humanity sort of going off to the horizon.
Yeah.
And adrenaline kind of hits you like a wave, and suddenly, I'm just playing everything way too fast. And at that point, you do need somebody to remind us that, just because our hearts are going that fast doesn't actually make that music sound good at that tempo.
Nobody ever slows down.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
I like to meet the band that actually slows down when they get going on.
Exactly.
So, what made who actually signed you, and what was the thought behind process of hiring an instrumentalist? Because that's not something that gets done very often. And who's the one that took the chance on making that happen?
It's funny, actually, how do I describe this? I did a demo initially, which I pitched to Sony Music Canada. Yeah. I met somebody who said, "Oh yeah, I can get something to Sony Music for you." So I did 3 tunes. I think it was Tempest, Cascada, and I can't remember what the third one was. And they went and they pitched it, and I got this letter back saying, very polite, "Thanks, but no thanks." But by then I'd already written 3 songs, and I had a studio. I was back in my 20s. I was a composer and a producer, and I just did music. I was kind of a music mercenary. I made music for other people's projects and did whatever was needed. So I built my first studio in my mom's basement, and it just had sort of grown from there. So I always had a place that I could make music. It wasn't really fancy, but I could do my own thing. Yeah. So I had these 3 songs, and I thought, I'm going to just keep going and make an album and see what happens. And a lot of friends at that time were saying, you should really record an album. Like this music you're doing for other people, it's nice, but your own music has got something a little more heartfelt in it. And also my own music was sort of more rumba flamenco or flamenco based. And occasionally I would find some television producer or a dance choreographer who wanted that, but most people didn't. Most of them they wanted something else. So anyway, I recorded Tempest, my first record, and when I finished it, luckily I had this woman, Kathleen Shea, help me sort of put together a little press package and get it out there, and miraculously. I launched it independently, and it got on the first day. CBC Radio's Peter Zofsky, which was this national program, he interviewed me, and then I went right to Global TV and did a second national TV show, all on the first day. And when I first, because it was independent, I'd only had 1,000 copies of the CD. Printed, because I didn't, that seemed like a lot to me, and I didn't have any money for any more. So we did 1,000, and they were gone in the first week. They were completely sold out across the country. Wow. And the distributor was saying, "We need more," and I was like, "I don't have any more money. I can't." So they fronted me the money. We pressed another 2,000. They immediately sold out. Around the same time, we started getting interest from several record companies in the States, saying, we'd love to sign you. And I think Wyndham Hill was interested. There was another label, Higher Octaves, that was very interested. Yep. And there was this label, Narada, that I'd never even heard of. And I think they had mostly been doing new age music or something, and they wanted to get into world music. And they wanted to start signing artists like Leela Downs. And eventually they ended up being bought by, I think, Real World, or distributing Real World Records, Peter Gabriel's label. So, but at that time they were just sort of dipping their toe into world music, and I didn't know who they were. I didn't really take them seriously when they offered me a record deal, but they were very serious, and they sent me a couple of plane tickets for me and this woman Kathleen to fly down to Milwaukee, Wisconsin,
Yeah.
Laverne and Shirley and all that, right? And the president of the company drove to the airport and picked us up and brought us to the factory and like introduced me to everybody in the entire company and was like, we really, really want you. And it was one of those things where that night we're flying back to Toronto and we're saying, I don't know who those people are, but they seem really committed. And I don't think you can really put that in a deal. You know what I mean? You can't sort of have contract that they're actually going to care about your project.
Yeah.
So we signed with them, and I'm really glad I did. That they somehow, they pulled all the strings they got. They got me into the Catalina Jazz Festival. So right around the first week when it was launched, when the CD was launched, and things took off for me at the first concert at the Catalina Jazz Festival. I wasn't even playing on the main stage. I was in a bar downstairs, but the place went crazy, and it was it's on an island off the coast of LA. And because it's an island, you're not allowed to bring proper cars on. There's only golf carts. So everybody's driving around in golf carts. And, the band and I were in golf cart leaving the venue, and people were like running, chasing us. It was like the Beatles, except only on this little island, Yeah. So it was this crazy thing where we got back at the end of that weekend from the Catalina Jazz Festival. My album had debuted at number 14 on the Billboard charts in the US. And I was just like, what's happened? My life up to that point had been very, sort of behind the scenes. And I really did not expect any of this to happen. And it kind of took off and then kind of shot up to this level that was remarkable. And then from there, as I said, it's just been actually sort of rolling up my sleeves and okay, now we're going to start touring in Europe. Okay, now we're going to start touring in Singapore. Okay, we're going to go to Australia. We got to build this sort of worldwide thing. And it's been a lot of work, but it's been fun too.
That's an amazing story. And just probably had to be a bunch of things all firing all at the same time, right? Where it's like, I think there was a lot of timing in my favor. I think I was the right sound at the right time. I think this label's competitor was Higher Octave, and they had an artist named Otmar Liebert, who was, he sounded a bit like the Gypsy Kings, and he'd been doing really well. And so this label was like, we want one of those. You know what I mean? And there I was, and I was kind of doing this rumba stuff, and they're like, yeah, we love that. And so it was this just the right. I was, if I'd been 3 years later, I don't know, or if I'd been 3 years earlier too, maybe nobody'd be interested. It was just the timing was really lucky, and if I was this age back then, would they have been interested in? I don't know. I don't know how that all works. I doubt it. I sort of feel like being 29 and having the right sound at the right time, it all clicked. Yeah, I mean, it all happens for a reason, right? And it's pretty neat. I love hearing that type of story because it's not always the way it is. And obviously you've put a lot of work in over the years, but it's nice when, you put something out and you get some action and it works. I mean, that must have just felt fantastic.
The crazy thing is, there a lot of people sort of pay their dues. They'll sit there in little tiny clubs for no audiences for a long time before things really break.
Yeah.
And somehow I got to bypass that part. Like I played 2 gigs before I got signed. The first one, I don't think people even realized we were there. I don't think they could see us from that place. They were completely ignoring us. The second one, I think I told my mother, and she invited all her friends, so the place was packed, and it kind of exploded, and the record companies happened to be there that night, so that was really sort of good timing, and they saw it, and oh, this must be really happening. It really wasn't. It was just totally lucky that night, everybody showed up. And then after that, the next gig was the Catalina Jazz Festival, and then after that, it's just been, theaters and touring. Now, having said that, touring the world is never like that. We'd be in San Diego playing in front of a huge crowd, and then the next day you're in some town where they've never heard of you, and you're loading your own instrument. So it always seems like, wow, this is great, but the music industry has a way of keeping you humble. I don't know what it's like for a real star like a Justin Bieber or something like that, but at my level, even one day you're playing in a castle in Lebanon, and the next day you're still schlepping your gear, and so we're trying to slowly work our way to the point where we really never have to carry the gear anywhere. But there's always some part of the world where I feel like we still got to lift that stuff, you know?
Yeah, it feels like the good old days.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, it doesn't hurt to do that. But it's not as fun when you get, it's sort of like, you know, flying in the front of the plane and all of a sudden you got to go to the back. It's, you still get the job done, but it's not quite as nice.
I know. Well, we don't fly in the front of the plane unless they upgrade me. You know, it's mostly, I have to say, because those plane trips are expensive.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But we do tour bus. That's mostly what we do.
Is it? Yeah.
Tour bus is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you don't even have to check out of the hotel on a tour bus. You just wake up and you're there. You're at the next venue. It's fantastic. So.
Yeah, it's the way to do it. As long as you can kind of keep that tour consistent and the shows going one after another. If you got to sit for any length of time between shows, it starts getting a little costly.
No, it can be brutal. Like if you're you know, sort of sitting in some parking lot somewhere between two cities where the bus driver needs to sleep, and we become bus refugees, you know, and you're like, oh my God, this is terrible. But you know, again, all that stuff, the longer we tour and the more we have an audience most places, the more things sort of start to become quite reasonable and comfortable. I think you can tour for a long time as long as, you know, you don't kind of make it too difficult. I think people can lose their minds on the road if things get too crazy.
I remember being young and hearing about people touring, and I can't remember what group I heard about. And gosh, this is, you know, I must have been 12 or 13, and I heard about this band, and it's like, did you hear such and such? When they go on the road, everyone in the band gets their own hotel room. and it's like, could you imagine they all get their own room? It's sort of like, and I thought, at a young age, I think that was just ridiculous, how crazy. And now, I mean, I won't tour without my own room. There's no way that's ever going to happen.
Exactly.
I'll turn down the biggest gig if I have to share a room with anybody. It's just like, no.
Yeah. No, exactly.
That's the negotiation spot right there, is the hotel room. So
I remember that was a good year. I'm trying to remember when I think it was around 98, 99 when we finally went, you know what? It doesn't matter whether we're losing or making money on this tour. We need hotel rooms. And I was like, oh, this is lovely. You know, just to, you know, it's not, I don't mind sharing once in a while, or I didn't back then, but you know, now that once you've sort of got to that point where you don't have to share anymore, you're just like, this is the way it should never go back. It should never go back.
Yeah. You need that space on the road just to have your own, you know, normalcy.
Well, especially if you're on a tour bus, you know, because the tour bus, it's like a big floating, you know, there's 8 of
Petri dish.
Petri dish. I didn't want to say that. We're all breathing the same air, you know. It's if one of you gets a cold, you all get a cold. That's why Spinal Tap was so brilliant, I think. Yeah. It was just all a little too close to truth. Yeah.
So let's sit back even further, just a little bit of history. I read you were born in Paris, France. Was that correct?
Yep. So my parents were actually Canadian. I think people often think that I was French or something, but my parents were Canadian. In fact, I remember when I went to Russia to do a tour, they got me a translator to translate into Russian, and it was a French to Russian translator. So I had to do my part in French, which is, you know, a weaker language by far for me. So, but it was, you know, I think they read that on the bio and they think, oh my God, he's totally French. But no, my parents were, my mother was from Montreal. My father was from Toronto. They met at Bishop's University. And after they graduated, they went off to Europe. My dad wanted to live in Paris on the left bank and write, you know, he wanted to be Hemingway, basically. Oh, yeah. And he became a photographer to make a living in Paris. And my mom went initially to London to be a journalist, and then she ended up in Paris with my dad. And my sister and I showed up. And then things get complicated. There's a lot of moving around, and then my parents split up, and eventually my sister, my mom, and I came back to Canada when I was about 4. Yeah. And then after that, there was a lot of back and forth to visit my dad, and also we had this beautiful house in the south of France that my parents had bought for $200.
Wow.
And yeah, and it was like parts of it were from the 1600s. Like it was just, it had 7 old bread ovens in it, at different points. Like nuns had lived there, and
Jeez.
it was at one point it had been called Black Death House when the plague came through. It was that kind of thing, like crazy amount of history. But it was beautiful. It was just a beautiful part of France, and so we spent our summers there and stuff. But otherwise, no, I'm a Canuck.
Awesome. So what age did you start picking up the guitar?
My mom says I was 3.
Oh, wow.
Or it must have been 2 because it was Barcelona. I don't remember any of it. I do remember when we came to Canada, I was given a little tiny toy guitar, and I loved it, and I was constantly like trying to play it. And my mom finally met Ellie Kasner, who's a sort of famous guitar teacher. He was a student of Segovia's, I think, and he had a school in Toronto. She met him at a party, and she said, "What age is a good age to start kids with guitar lessons?" And Ellie Kastner said, "Oh, as soon as they're interested." And my mom said, "My God, my kid's been interested forever." So I was 6 at that point.
Yeah.
But I guess the people she'd asked before that didn't want to teach me, because I guess people thought most people didn't think it was worthwhile teaching a little kid. Yeah. So anyway, luckily Ellie took me on at his school, and then I sort of started with other teachers and worked my way up to being one of his students. And weirdly enough, one of the first teachers I ever had was a guy named Alan Torak, who himself was a flamenco guitarist, and he taught me some very basic flamenco forms. And one of the first pieces I learned is a Spanish form called Sevillanas, and lots of risqueados and things. Yeah. And I just loved it. And it had already been something that I loved from the Barcelona thing, and it just kind of continued this weird conspiracy to make a Canadian kid want to play flamenco guitar.
So when you're young at that age, what were you listening to music-wise? Do you remember what you were interested in? Obviously that style, but did you have any other outside influences that really made a difference?
Totally. No, yes, my mom had these Manitas de Platas records that I loved, and that he was a sort of a rumba style player, again from the south of France. I think he was actually related somehow to the Gypsy Kings. But my real love when I was young was the Beatles. And my parents actually had this sort of great record collection that I would constantly explore, and there were a lot of great albums in there, but the Beatles were always my favorite. And it's weird too, because I think they split up when I was 5 or 6 or something. So I never, they were so, I think the Beatles imprinted their music on so many people, and certainly that was the case with me. But they, I never knew them when they were still a band. I only see them in documentaries and things.
It's funny in a interview, and if I ask kind of influences, and anytime I bring up that question, it's rare that Beatles don't come up as a main influence to everybody. And it doesn't matter what style of music they play or anything, but it's just remarkable the effect they had, not only on their fans, but musicians. Yeah. It's amazing what effect that band had on musicians. Just, it's incredible.
Well, I think it was also the production. Like, I think it's funny because I was having this discussion with my kids the other day. Sometimes we'll play this game where we're on a road trip or something, and we're like, who do you prefer, the blah, 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 or the blah, blah, blah? So, I think my wife said, "So who do you prefer, the Beatles or the Led Zeppelin?" And both my kids went, "Led Zeppelin." Yeah. I was, what? What? No, don't get me wrong. I love Led Zeppelin. They're amazing. But, for me, I hear the Beatles everywhere. Yeah. I hear them on so many different musicians of different generations. I hear them in Bruno Mars. I heard them in Lenny Kravitz. I heard them on ELO. Like whatever. Pick me a decade, and I'll show you musicians who are ripping off the Beatles or, borrowing, being inspired by the Beatles. Yeah. And I started thinking, Led Zeppelin, there's definitely people who are influenced. Aerosmith, I guess, there are some that I don't hear. It's not the same where I don't hear it everywhere. I sort of feel like there are people who came out of Led Zeppelin, but they're really playing that style of music. Whereas the Beatles, I feel like, I won't lie. I've stolen, like, the end of the day of a day in the life, that big
Oh yeah.
sort of Stockhausen orchestral swell with a boom. I did that on one of my tunes. And I do rumba flamenca. So, if I can borrow them, that's really sort of crossing different types of genres, right? Like there's something really special about those.
Yeah, you wonder if they didn't exist, what music would have been, because it's almost that they were that influential that you wonder, if you could go back in time and they didn't exist, where we'd be now with music. It'd be interesting to.
Yep.
That would be an interesting experiment to know, because they're so influential. It's just it's really really crazy, but great. I mean, it's just amazing to have that type of worldwide influence. That's pretty amazing.
But the other big influence on me was obviously Al Di Meola and Paco de Lucia and John McLaughlin, those three guys.
Yeah.
They had a live record called Friday Night in San Francisco. And then that's as a player. And then as a producer, Peter Gabriel.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of what I actually do for a living, Peter Gabriel probably had made the biggest impression on me, because he embraced world music in a way that Western musicians hadn't really done up to that point. So he was kind of he was the artist that connected me to music from the rest of the world. That music always existed, but I wouldn't have found out about it if it hadn't been for, this British guy flying the National Canadian Dance Company up to the studio and recording it for the end of one of his pop tunes, and I remember just thinking that's the craziest, most amazing thing I'd ever heard. And so as soon as I start making records, I think I'm going to get a Brazilian percussion ensemble with 40 people pounding on drums and, do that. And it's one of those things where, that was what Peter Gabriel did. It's funny, as I find as time goes by, I see less and less of the effect. I mean, I actually hear his work more in film scores and things. I'll sort of go, oh, that's the Passion soundtrack being ripped off right there, But I don't see his work being sort of translating into other pop music as time goes by. It's sort of, it's fine. I mean, that's whatever. It's music is music. It should go where it's going to go. But it's interesting what endures and what doesn't.
When you look at doing an album now, or even when you first started and you finished your first album going through, what's your train of thought and putting together an album? And as far as, and I should know this, but have you produced all your albums, or have you looked at other producers, or how do you handle that situation?
You know what? I think perhaps my weakness as an artist is that I've always done things by myself. I started recording in my mom's basement by myself, and I just got so comfortable, learning each part of the craft and never having to explain myself, never having to try and explain to somebody else what you want. You just do it yourself. That I sort of feel like sometimes my work has suffered as a result. You know what I mean? That if I had worked with other producers, or let other people engineer more of my records, maybe they would have sounded better. Maybe more interesting other influences would have worked their way into my music. One of the few experiences I had working with other producers was there was a group in Britain called Afro Celt Sound System. They were kind of a Peter Gabriel super group. They came out of Real World Records, and I loved their work. And I think when Virgin bought Narada, the company I was with, suddenly there was this sort of sharing going on between us and Real World, and so I reached out to those guys, and they said, "Yeah, why don't you play on our record? We'll produce a couple of tracks with you." And I ended up going to London and spending a few weeks there and working with those guys, actually in Led Zeppelin's old studio.
Oh, cool.
On Britannia Row, yeah. I loved it. It was a great experience, and I learned a lot from doing it. But in general, I've just produced my own records. Now, in terms of my process, I try to change my process because I find if you keep putting yourself through the same paces, you end up with the same result each time. So I try to throw the wrench in the works from time to time and just go, okay, well, I'm just going to go up to, one year I did an album called The Blue Guitar Sessions, where I just went up to the cottage with a guitar and a microphone, and I just wrote nothing but 2 guitar pieces. And I said every morning I'm going to write a piece, and I'm not going to let myself do anything until that piece is written. Yeah. And then if I write it, as soon as it's done, I can do whatever I want for the rest of the day. And by the end of that summer, I came back and I had lots of different material. and then I sort of develop those, flesh them out into sort of full arrangements. Other times it'll be, I'll be working with loops, like I got into looping for a while, or I was really into trap music for a bit. And you just sort of, okay, what's exciting me, and let me learn a little bit about that and see what I can do with it. And right now this YouTube thing is sort of requiring me to, or seems to have led me to this place where I'm playing all the parts on acoustic instruments and using surdos as my bass and whatever. And that sort of, it's kind of exciting because I realize there's something a little bit trap music like about having a big drum be your bass anyway, right? For people who know about TR-808s, and how like basically a kick drum has become the bass sound of preference in modern pop music.
Yeah.
You sort of go, oh, the surdo was kind of the original TR-808, and that one you get to actually really whack it, and you can give it sort of intensity.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that lately and loving it, and just seeing where that gets me.
Do you approach when you start recording? Do you like to lay down some form of the rhythm based, or do you like to playing your guitar part and then building around that?
Sadly, too often I actually will record the rest of the music, kind of create the groove or whatever, and then I'll start writing. And I always feel like the music doesn't come out as well that way. That somehow I always feel like I'm trying to impose a melody onto something that already is interesting in its own right.
Yeah.
That if you start by trying to create this really interesting and groovy thing, and then you put a melody on it, sometimes it's not fitting just right. Whereas if you start with a melody and you build everything around it, the melody becomes the most important element, and everything else is there to support it. There's this more organic chemistry to it somehow.
Yeah.
So I sort of say this in hindsight, but there are many tunes that have started sort of to be probably just out of sheer laziness, that I'm sort of sit down, I'm going to work on create this great groove, because I love a great groove, right?
Oh yeah.
And I keep going, I'll get to the melody later, and before I know it, the thing's become something big, and now I go in there with the guitar and I'm like, oh, there's no space for a melody anymore, Whereas when I do sort of sit down and play the instrument, the only instrument I really know how to play, it tends to come out a little better.
Yeah, because I guess you would probably, when you've got something big around you, you'd probably really have to simplify your melody because there isn't the space for it.
Well, and the
doesn't mean that won't be good, but
I think, it sounds like you produce and you arrange, and that often the more you add, the smaller everything becomes. You know what I mean? You think it's going to keep getting bigger, but in fact, it's just each part becomes smaller sounding because it's all fighting for the same space. And so when the melody is not there, you're often filling space that the melody is going to occupy. You know what I mean? You want that note to be right in the middle of everything, and everything else is built around supporting it. I'm trying to think of an analogy. There must be some architectural analogy where, you built a house and you didn't think about the bathroom, the kitchen, or what were you thinking? Just trying to fit it in afterwards. And I'm not, that's not a good analogy, but there we go.
No, I understand. I was mixing in a project, a couple songs for a client, and they sent me these songs, and it was just loaded full of stuff. And I ended up stripping half of everything they recorded out, and
it just sounds better and better.
Yeah, I sent it to them. I'm thinking, oh God, they're going to really not like me pulling all this stuff out. And their first comment about the mix is this: it sounds huge. That's like, yeah, I took out half the stuff. It just exactly for what you said. You just get this ball of noise, and I find a lot of music today is that it's just lots of stuff all happening, and they're just either pulling chunks out of it for a verse section and just turning it back on for the chorus section, and it's like you never hear like little nice licks or parts anymore. It's just a wall with a melody. And
sometimes too, I find I've heard bands will do an arrangement where all the musicians are playing all the time, because when you're in a band, you want to have something to do. You don't want to sort of sit there and do nothing and twiddle your thumbs for the chorus or the pre-chorus or whatever,
Yeah.
So, the net result is it sounds like the arrangement was on your mark, get set, go, and they all went. You know what I mean? That there's no little quiet, intimate moments, like huge choruses where everybody comes in and rocks it. You know what I mean? And I sort of feel like that is kind of why you need to have an arranger. Somebody who sort of does what you do. It sort of makes the difficult choices. And maybe they probably loved you for it, because as a band, maybe they couldn't say, hey, listen, can you sit out? But if somebody else outside the band comes along and goes, you know what, it sounds better if I'm going to do this, and we're not going to discuss it. And once you hear the result, everybody's like, well, the result sounds great, so we're totally happy with it. I think that is what a good producer does anyways. Half of it is
it's like
being democratic, being diplomatic, I think is the word.
Yeah, they're like, producers should also be producer / manager of the session, because that's what it ends up being. You're managing this group of guys and putting them together, and hopefully if you pick the right guys, you don't have to do a lot of producing. That's part of the trick, is knowing who to get, and then your job becomes a little bit easier. So
years ago I worked with Al Schmidt, who was one of the sort of great engineers of all time. Won more Grammys, I think, than just about anybody, 21 Grammys or something. And I worked with him because I still had a record deal, and I still actually had a budget that was being given to me by a record company to make a record. And I thought, this isn't going to last much longer, the way the world is going, and downloading and all that. So while somebody else is paying the bill, I should actually go and take the opportunity to mix with one of these legends. So I called up Al Schmidt, and I was kind of amazed to discover that he was pretty much the same price as hiring an engineer anywhere in your local town, with a main room of a big studio or whatever. And he was in the Capitol building, that circular building in Los Angeles that the aliens always blow up in the big movies. And I remember it was so it was such a learning experience for me, realizing how simplistic, how he had this philosophy and he stuck to it. And his philosophy was, he's like, well, we have the best musicians in the world and playing the best instruments in the world, and are being recorded by the best mics in the world. I just try to get out of the way and not mess it up. You know what I mean? And I sort of thought, there's something to that. So he doesn't use EQ. He doesn't use compression. He mixed on a digital Neve.
Yeah.
And I took a picture of it, because on that Neve, if you put the EQ on, a little light comes on to say the EQ is engaged.
Yeah.
And I took a picture of the console at the end of my mix, because none of the lights were on. All he's using is the faders. And he'll basically, the things that Al Schmidt sort of works on are the things you really hear, right? Like the things that not a trained musician hears. You know what I mean? Like the first time you heard compression, somebody had to explain to you what was going on, because you're like, it sounds different, but I'm not sure how. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He doesn't use compression. He just uses automation. He uses volume.
Yeah.
You can tell if it's too quiet, you can't hear it, I turn it up. You know what I mean? He uses reverbs like crazy. We all can hear reverb. Oh, that sounds like echo. So the things that we really are aware of, he really works those things. The things that only sort of trained engineers know about, right? EQ and compression, which, I don't know about you, but me, I couldn't imagine trying to build a mix without EQ and compression. It's like trying to build a house without a saw and a hammer or something.
Exactly.
And yet he had these incredible mixes in 3 hours. Like I'm talking about a 90 channel mix with an orchestra and percussion and bass and like just all sorts of crazy stuff, sounding amazing in 3 hours or less. Like I think the first day he opened up a session, I got a call from him saying, hey, this is your, I was in Toronto at that point. Later, the same day I ended up flying out, because I was like, why am I in Toronto? I should go and be beside him and watch him do it. So the first day I'm in Toronto, and I get this call, and he says, I'm just opening up your mix. Is there anything special? And I was like, no. Be Al Schmidt. Do what Al Schmidt does. And he goes, okay. So I get a call in an hour, and I'm thinking it's going to be, something's wrong, right? Yeah. And he's like, I got a mix. You want to hear it? In an hour. Which for you and I is hilarious. For most people at home, maybe they think that's normal. Like an hour, most engineers are still working on the kick sound or something after an hour. Do you know what I mean? Like bussing in something, their distressor or something. Hal Schmidt, he had the whole thing up, and I was kind of like, what? And it was huge, but I realized there's no compression on anything, and that's part of why it's so big. Like there was nothing, I was like, I'm not sure. I'm not used to hearing my guitar with no compression. He's like, I'll put some compression on it. So he puts it through a summit, right? Which again, to you and I is kind of funny. Like summit's normally for mastering engineers or something. Yeah. So he puts it through a summit, and immediately it gets smaller, which normally I'm not aware of because normally there's lots of compression in my mixes. And
everything else
when there's no compression in something, you suddenly go, oh wow, it got smaller. It's not as kind of open and glassy sounding.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can hear the people just completely being bored out of the tree. Since you know what I'm talking about, I would discuss this. You can cut it out later.
People Googling compression.
I don't care. Will he stop talking about that?
That's pretty awesome, though. What an experience. It speaks volumes, right? I mean, and everyone has their thing, right? It's been neat with this time off. There are a lot of big engineers now sitting and shooting videos and a lot of different things of their mixes and spending a lot more time. And I've watched a few, and they're fascinating. Just watching their process, and you realize it's not rocket science, right? It's just they have a process, and they, like you said, they stick to it. This is the way they do it. This is how they have their sound, and bam, it's done. There's I'm trying to remember I think it's puremix.com or one of those companies that you can kind of go on and watch other guys mix, and they have this song they've sent to maybe about 8 different engineers now. The song called Lifeboats, and I keep popping on every once in a while, and they have a series. It could be 4 or 5 hours of them completely sitting there doing the mix and talking about everything they're doing and every single plug-in they're using and that. So you can go to the series, and I just usually jump to the end and listen to the final product, then go to the next one, listen to the final product, go to the next one, listen to the final product. And it's massively different between each person. Yeah. And these are all top guys. And it's interesting because none of them are wrong.
No.
And they're all great mixes, but they're just them, right? It's
funny how I think because you're an engineer, you realize how important a good mix is. And because I engineered most of my own records, I feel the same way. And I think most people don't even realize it. They just take it for granted that it's going to sound huge, that all records sound huge, but it's hard. Most records don't see the light of day because they don't sound huge. And I sort of feel like engineers are really unsung heroes. I mean, they're doing, they're almost like the orchestra conductor. They are doing something that really takes a huge understanding of music and sound and electronics. And it's almost like alchemy. You're bringing it together. You're making magic out of all of this stuff. And I sort of feel like we don't often recognize just how good a great engineer is, how important that is to the whole process, and why you love that song. You know what I mean? Why you turn it up in your car or whatever, because it just sounds like amazing coming out of your speakers. But I'll tell you one more Al Schmidt story, and you can cut it out if you want. But I remember, again, I'm in LA sitting beside him because I realized I just wanted to see how he did what he did, and he's telling me stories about how he was asked to mix the Melody Gros record. Is that how you pronounce her name? Gordeau, Melody Gros? You know what I'm
talking about. Yeah. No, you mean, yeah.
She, I guess that she'd done her album and sent it off, and it got mixed by somebody. And as soon as she heard it, she burst into tears. She was like, it didn't recognize the sound of her music. And so the record company goes, we'll get Al, So they send the same mix off to Al, and he opens up the Pro Tools session. And he did his Al thing, and he mixed it, and immediately she's like, oh my God, it's fantastic, it's beautiful, you've saved me. And I said, what did you do? And he said, well, I just clicked on the plugins and removed them one by one, and every time I removed a plugin, it was like removing gauze from the music, and eventually it just all sounded good again. And you sort of think it's that's, but you have to hear it that way.
Yeah.
And he did. He somehow was able to make things sound bigger without all these things that we normally use to make things sound bigger. And that's the magic about.
Yeah, and I mean, there's times where plugins and those type of things kind of save your life, and then there's times where you go through and you find yourself buried down a hole and just not getting where you want to get, and you just pull all that stuff away, and all of a sudden it's like your life comes back to you again. It's like, I went down the rabbit hole way too far.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think we started talking about doing these things within a week, and I think part of what I've really enjoyed about this is that because I know I also have to shoot a video, I won't allow myself to engineer a song for a day, for 2 days or 3 days as I used to. And what happens is the first thing you lose when you're mixing for 3 days is perspective. You don't ever get to hear that music for the first time. You don't get to walk in and hear your song fresh and go, oh, this sounds great, or muffled, or giant, or the bass is too loud, or whatever. You never have that. As you go down the rabbit hole, the first thing you lose is perspective.
Yeah.
And when you have to do it fast, you always think, oh, there are compromises being made. But sometimes that urgency forces you to make decisions while you still actually are in a pretty good state to make those decisions. You still have this sort of clarity of vision because you're still hearing it relatively early on in the process yourself. So that was one of the things I really enjoyed about this, what I've been doing this year during COVID.
Awesome. Well, it's super impressive that you've engineered all your albums and done all that. I didn't know you did that part of it, so that's really impressive work. And it's nice that you're able to do that. I mean, I think having that as all one package, be able to produce, engineer, and play and deliver great products, it's got to make you feel really great about what you've done, right? It's you've felt you're in control. You deliver something that people really like, and you've done it yourself. It's authentically you, right?
Yeah, that is it. It's very, especially if you play all most of the instruments on most of the tracks. Occasionally I'll start by recording everything, and then I'll invite a musician who really plays that instrument occasionally to come and replace it, but only if it's something that didn't sound quite right already, or if it's violin or something that requires, a level of virtuosity I'll never have. But as I said, sometimes you sort of wonder, well, what would it have sounded like if I had, a George Martin at my side or whatever, and then the other thing is, in the last few years, that other career has become making the sort of video aspect of things and editing and color grading. And for me, color grading is as difficult as engineering. And it's a whole, at 56, to sort of be deep into this other very complicated thing that you're like, oh, I need to learn more about it. And it's not just these YouTube videos and whatever. I actually filmed and directed my own PBS special, and it ended up being aired on TV, and I've done most of my music videos, certainly everything from the last 10 years onward. So it's something where it's another art form that is completely different from music, but because it's a music video, there's an element of music that's running through all of it. And I find when I'm editing the music, I feel like I'm editing it as a musician would, we know as musicians, oh yeah, this is the drum fill, and that's that little bass thing. And so you want to capture all those moments in your edit. And I remember when I was used to do music videos, when other people would do the music videos for me, I'd always be feeling like they're missing, like they're not connecting to what's happening in the music, because I think, I learned later, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I remember realizing that sometimes there are some people who listen to music and they're just feeling it with their heart. You know what I mean? They're not thinking, oh, this is the violin solo or whatever. They're just kind of going, oh, I feel so, and they're not at all thinking about what instrument's doing what and what's creating the groove or any of those things that we just immediately think about because we're listening, because we spent a lifetime doing this, right?
Yeah.
And so I sort of feel like when you're a musician and you edit your own videos and you record your own videos and all that stuff, it actually, you do make a video that looks quite different from somebody who's not a musician. And again, I would probably be way better if I got Martin Scorsese, but in the meantime,
No, I'm sure.
My problem. I need to record everything myself and enjoy it. So there we go.
It's always like an analogy I always use. If it's like having a lighting guy for a live show who's not a musician, and it's just like you look at. I don't know how many tours I've gone out, and I'll be sitting there, and a lot of time I'll be in a producing role of the show or something, and I'll be like using the house guy, and eventually I just go like, "What in the world are you doing?"
Your bass solo, and the guy's in total darkness, and the lights on something else. You're like, "What? Him? That guy? Let's look at him. He's playing a solo for you."
Yeah, or they just randomly move lights.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with anything with the music or anything. It's just all of a sudden we're just sitting there like, hit the button, do something different, in random times. And I remember once doing this show, and this lighting guy in between songs while the artist was talking, we all of a sudden, have a look, all of a sudden we'd be like, and all of a sudden everything would move, right? And I'm sitting there going, okay, well, maybe he just made a mistake. And sure enough, the next song, same thing. Okay. And then the third song after they're talking, he did some big thing. And I finally looked over and said, if you do that ever again, I'm going to, and it was like, and he just looked at me. It was like, what? And I was like, wow. Okay. And then he stopped.
But I think that's the lighting guy going, look at me. Look at my lights. Aren't they beautiful? He's not thinking about, sort of trying to make the music more enhance what's happening on stage. He's just trying to, do something that he likes, which is lighting, right? Like I always feel that, there are many artists do that. We all probably do it in our own way, where we want to shine. But there are times where you feel as an artist, the best way to help the project is to be supportive, is to kind of figure out what can you do to make what's really what people are focusing on, whether it's the vocal, the lead, whatever, you want to enhance that and give everything that you're doing to that moment. And I guess that's what makes the great lighting guys too, is that they understand that, right? They're there to enhance the music, the music's not there to enhance their lights. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's funny when you mention color grading, for me, that's like mixing audio, is that everyone could sit behind and do it, and it's going to look different for every single person who does it. And whenever I do anything like that, I second guess myself so much and said, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, if it's technically right. But then I have to tell myself, does it look good to you? And if it looks good to you, then that's what you want. Still same thing. I mix. I'm sure I'm doing stuff wrong. I'm sure there's probably a better way to do this, even after 30 years. But you know what? It's the way I do it, and it gets me to the finish line, and it still works. So there's no, rules that you're going to get arrested because you cued the kick drum this way. So it's interesting.
I mean, music is funny that way too. The other thing is, I've heard songs where, I'll hear it and I'll think, that is a terrible mix. Like, that mix is awful. I can't believe, listen to that kick drum sound, whatever. But you realize that the song itself really touches you in a certain way. And you realize that in some ways that kind of very ambient sounding, natural sounding mix, in fact, gives the whole thing an air of authenticity. And maybe that's part of its magic, right? Is that it's not in any way trying to impress you. It's kind of warts and all, like, I don't want to say Neil Young is an example of that, because that's not what I'm thinking of, but maybe it's that thing, that, 3 chords and the truth approach to music, that at the end of the day, it's whatever touches you that's important. It's the thing that actually sort of somehow gets past your defenses and makes you feel something. And however they arrive at that is fair game.
Cool. Well, let's wrap up on a couple questions here I'd like to ask my guests, especially your guitar player, obviously. This one's specifically for you. If you had to leave the house for a quick reason, say, I don't know, if it's on fire or something, and you had to take, or you had time just to take one instrument, which one would it be?
forever. I think if I had to leave in my desert island thing, would be that guitar over there. The Conde Hermanos is the sort of Stradivarius of flamenco guitars.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's, if I only had to play one guitar the rest of my life, that would be it.
Where'd you find that one?
I bought it in Madrid. I actually spent a week in Madrid going to all the great luthiers. And it's funny, it wasn't their best guitar. Their best guitar was this other thing, right?
Yeah.
And Brazilian rosewood back inside, and this one had Indian rosewood back inside. But I played it, and it just sounded like tobacco or coffee. It had this incredible like rah sound, and I was like, oh my god. And again, this is not like, it's not like a Gibson. They don't make them in the factory. These are handmade guitars made one at a time, and they sell for a crazy amount of money. And you're there with the luthier trying it in his little shop in Madrid. And I kept going back and trying the guitars and whatever. And finally he said, do you want to hear somebody else play the guitar so you can be on the other side of it? I said, yeah, that would be great. And he goes, hang on a second. And he calls his nephew, right? And his nephew comes in and he sits down and he plays, and it's just like insanely good little 13-year-old kid playing this guitar. I was like, oh my God, what the hell? And turns out the kid was Javier Conde, who's since become a world famous guitarist, right? But anyway, after Javier Conde played, I said to the kid, I was like, which guitar do you prefer? This one or that one? And he said, oh, I prefer this one, the same one I had preferred. And his father said, yes, but that's the better one. And then the kid goes, yes, but that's the better one. But I prefer this one. So it's one of those things, they come out the luck of the draw. It just had a certain sound. And yeah, it's the one I've done most of my records with. So.
Awesome. Another question for you. You obviously have played all over the world in many, many venues. Is there a place out there, a venue out there, or a city or a country even that you've never played that you've always wanted to?
There are tons of places I've always wanted to play and I've never played. I have yet to play in Brazil.
Oh, wow.
And, Brazilian music has been a fair part of the music that I do. I've never played in India, and I had a song of mine, Mario Takes a Walk, become a huge hit in India. Not as Mario Takes a Walk, it became this Bollywood theme song to, a series of movies called Doom.
Wow.
DHOM, which is kind of like Mission Impossible. I think they're on Doom 7 now or something, right? Like It's just hugely successful franchise, and the main song, Doom Doom, it was my song, Mario Takes a Walk. So I've always wanted to go there and play, but it just, I haven't got there yet. So someday we'll go and see what happens.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah. And last one, we'll wind up on this one because it's always a favorite of mine. And it's spinning off to another podcast I'm starting, but it's we all know that when we go on tour, the show is a great part, but it's what we really want to do is go to that great restaurant when we're done the show. And do you have a favorite one that pops out to you that in your travels that this was really epic?
You know what? There were two meals that over the years have just stayed with me. One was in Lebanon. We played in this castle overlooking the ocean. The stadium kind of went out over the ocean, and the castle's on the shore. And between soundcheck and show, the promoters walked us up the hill up into this little village, and they had this insanely good meal, like crazy good meal. The kind of thing where the table is sort of lowered and you walk down and sit down, and there's fires inside the table, and the food is sort of being cooked in front of you. And I just remember it was orgasmic. And all this time later, I just want to somehow get back there and order another meal. I don't know how that would work, but it was so good. So good. Awesome.
That's great. Yeah. Those conversations usually come up more than the gigs themselves, the food that which is great. Well, what's the best way for people to stay in touch? Obviously you've got the YouTube thing going on, which is really great.
So go to my YouTube channel, Jesse Cook. The series is called Love in the Time of COVID, but just search me and you'll probably find me. Otherwise, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Occasionally I'll tweet, but I'm really not much of a tweeter, I have to admit. And yeah, otherwise jessecook.com, and that's about it, I guess.
Awesome. Well, it's been a really awesome conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Stay on. In just a second, we'll say proper goodbye, but thanks again. And we'll catch up. I can't wait to, we're all playing again, and we can come out and see a concert. And I'm sure you'll be out on the road sooner than later. So
that would be nice. Yeah.
Thanks again.
Good. Thanks for having me.